Randy is an Azure App Innovation Specialist with Microsoft, focusing on application development. He connects with customers to help them understand options on how to improve their development practices on Azure and take advantage of new possibilities the cloud offers. Randy assists customers to understand the business benefits of moving applications to the cloud and how Azure can enhance performance and provide efficiencies for both hybrid and full cloud environments. He is part of the Midwest Region Apps and Infrastructure Specialist team and works with customers to demonstrate and provide our solutions by eliminating technical barriers of moving to the cloud. So thank you, Randy, for being here. Take it away.
Yep, thank you, Steve. And you can see my screen okay? I did.
Yes.
Yep, just jump in if, yeah, so welcome everyone. As Steve said, Randy Pagels, I will go through a quick intro for myself as well, just a little bit here. As soon as I can figure out how to get the slides to move. There we go. My agenda is going to be a little loose tonight. I want to bring together some of my favorite things I talk about with customers, the state of app dev, app services, talk a little bit about Visualstudio 2022, .NET Core, and then modernizing different apps. These are the types of conversations I have with customers. So when Joe and Steve asked me to talk, I thought I would sprinkle some of these together. It's going to be very laid back. I have some demos I want to talk about it as well. So that's kind of what's going to happen. A quick note about me. I've been with Microsoft for 15 years. Before that, I worked in DT Energy for a while, 16 years there. I was an app dev, line of business app developer in IT as well. And then came to Microsoft. So again, 15 going on 16 years now. So I've been around a while, know lots of people, and which is great. Fun stuff about me: love water, kayaking. I'm a big Friends fan, enthusiast, and craft beer. I couldn't help but call that out. So that's me in a kind of a nutshell. So I just wanted to start by, hey, let's start with, man, through last, year and a half, 2 years with COVID is what we found being online a lot, talking to a lot of different customers. Customers they're starting to accelerate their innovation. That's the gist of what this is talking about, is how do app dev teams excel and innovate? And it seems it's gone really well from that standpoint for app dev teams. So kind of amazing with that. Public cloud adoption. So obviously part of my job is educate customers on moving and building applications in the cloud. So developer velocity in the cloud now has been 4x, which is amazing as well. So just a couple of stats. These are sort of marketing slides, and I promised you I wouldn't have any, but clearly there's still some. App of the future is this cloud native. You may or may not have heard the term. So think of cloud native as, I think there's different definitions of it, but cloud native to me, hey, you're building microservices, you're building different APIs, you're building integration services, you're building serverless type functions, you're building things born in the cloud. That is cloud native, containers, etc., and then tying it together and wrapping it around DevOps. So DevOps is, I think it's the most everyday conversation that I have. No matter what I'm talking to a customer about, DevOps always comes up. Kind of amazing there. A couple of things. Our build conference was May, I think. I got a link in here. I can show it to you if you haven't seen any of the build conference. So I just thought I'd sprinkle a few slides in here on what did we talk about at the developer conference. So Microsoft's best-in-class tools. Hopefully none of this is too new here, but on the left-hand side, of course, we have our tooling. GitHub, Visualstudio Code is the free IDE editor. Azure DevOps is our actual DevOps product. So the irony that we actually call it DevOps. And any of those, and I can show you a couple things. Again, I'm going to keep it loose here. So if you do want to see something specific, just ask. But the integration between those four tools on the left and our Azure services, API management, and Azure are incredibly tight integration as far as building, deploying, debugging, testing, etc. I'll show you a couple things in VS Code I thought was pretty cool. And on the right-hand side, we were calling that low code, no code, citizen development. You've heard that term for Power Automate, Power Apps, building Power Apps. Power Apps really aren't a lot of code, but you can do some pretty powerful things with them. So that's kind of the lay of the land. This is a 50,000 foot view lay of the land. And then when you're looking at deploying to the cloud in Azure, again, tooling on the right, but platform as a service, you'll hear me talk about a lot. I think that's the sweet spot. That's where a lot of customers, in my patch, actually in the US, you'll see a lot of activity in the platform as a service because it's managed by Microsoft. You just worry about your code, worry about your apps deployed to the cloud. That entire platform as a service sits on top of the infrastructure. I'm going to show you a slide on that, what that looks like. Not to be a reading slide, but I thought it was cool and worth mentioning. One of the announcements was made is we now support Java applications. So it's a fully managed bot framework called Azure Spring Cloud. And it makes it real easy for customers that are wanting to move their Java apps, but have it fully managed by Microsoft. So again, think Azure Spring Cloud. I don't plan on going in deep any one of these things, but these are just announcements that we made. The other one that was big is the Red Hat JBoss as well. So we have, think of JBoss as a service to move any JBoss apps you may or may not have with Red Hat, moving those into Azure as well. So there's a virtual machine you can spin up with that kind of stamped out. So that's some announcements we made there. I thought that was worthy of mentioning. If you haven't seen this slide, this is Azure, basically. Again, it's not meant to be scary. It's not meant to be a reading chart, but I like to say it this way, that on the very bottom of the slide, think of those as our 50-some data centers running tens of thousands of servers, all integrated up through basically three verticals: compute, storage, and networking. And everything's tied together. From there on up, everything else is a platform as a service. So if you're doing application development, you'll see web apps in the center here, our integration services, APIs, Azure Functions, our tooling's built in here. All this sits on top of this infrastructure layer. I just thought that was cool, thought it'd be worth showing. We really, nowadays, especially nowadays, you want everything you do to be secure. So we have this whole vertical on the left for security purposes, whether it's 2auth or multi-factor, whether it's Active Directory, which is very popular, even Key Vault for keeping your application development or connection string secrets is also there. And then of course, last but not least is our data. SQL data, Cosmo DB, databases, MariaDB. There's a bunch of options for building things. So super high level there. Keep going here. I mentioned application services. So think of app services. I have web apps. I have a lot of customers taking their IIS servers off VMs and taking the applications themselves and putting them in Azure in the app service and not ever have to worry about those VMs anymore. And then functions, serverless functions I call these glue, so you can use these functions as glue. And then Azure Logic App is more of a workflow. And API management is probably the second or third thing I talk about most to customers. API management is pretty popular for that facade of calls into your applications for puts and gets and etc. So we've built some, I thought, pretty nice IDE development pieces inside of VS Code and Visual Studio. And then Event Grid, you can't leave that out. Event Grid is for processing different events get triggered from different applications. So this is just talking about a few more things on the app service. This isn't there's a lot here. If you haven't even played around with application services, it's worth your time. There's always a free tier with everything you do in Azure. If you do have Visual Studio, there's hopefully you have an MSDN. There's some free credits that you get with that too. So the idea is encourage you to go create your own sandbox and play around and test some things out if you want. So the platform service runs a lot of different code, whether it's beyond just .NET, Java, Node.js, Go, Python, Ruby, etc. So it handles a lot. A lot of our, you can deploy your apps in containers. A lot of customers nowadays are containerizing their apps and moving into Azure. Most of the cores, I shouldn't say most, more than half of the cores in Azure are running Linux. So that kind of tells you that, hey, Linux is a little less expensive. And Linux, it's a completely managed service, so I can deploy my app to a Linux server and I don't really care as long as it runs, right? And then there's always kind of the staging and development. I'll show you a few of those things when I show you some demos here. Another nice thing customers use all the time is auto scaling. Hey, I have a small instance running my app, but if I need more scale,
maybe it gets hit with more customers or whatever load goes onto it, it auto scales up and down, which is nice. It's set it and forget it. That's one of the power or the beauty of an app service is the ability to do that. And then I said on the right here, enterprise grade. So Active Directory is quite popular. And then the geo, they call it highly available, so I can distribute that across different data centers. So my app is always available, always on. Another area that we announced and build was open source. So Microsoft is a huge proponent of open source. You can see some of these numbers here: 60,000, open source components. There's 30,000 employees at Microsoft that contribute to open source. It's pretty big. It's a big deal. There's some different, just a slide on languages and etc. So I'll skip that one. I mentioned this before, Linux is the fastest growing platform on Azure. And yeah, in the interest of time, we'll go through these slides. These are from build, so we're just gonna skip it a little bit here. Another announcement we made was this, they call it PaaS VNext, so the platform as a service. What's VNext mean? Is the ability to run these services, so app service functions and events, logic apps, etc. This layer across the top here, to be able to run that on premise. So I could take that and run it. You could take that and run it in your own data centers on your own machine. It'll run as if it was in Azure. And the magic there is this thing, we call it, it's called Arc-enabled applications. So through this integration layer in the center here, and I can take functions and logic apps or Kubernetes and just run them out locally, which is pretty cool. This is what's coming. This is going to be the new wave here. So I'm definitely oversimplifying this, but keep that in mind. Another thing that's making this easy for developers to create applications is this component called Dapper. If you haven't heard of it, D-A-P-R, Dapper. It's the building block. So the idea is take an application and connect it to the services without having to worry about all the plumbing. It's pretty easy. It's very pluggable. It's very adaptable to all these different languages that are out there. This is an open source project, so it doesn't cost anything to do this. Here's an example of taking a Java app and binding it to, let's say, a Twitter feed. Everything in this blue box here is a part of Dapper wiring. So if I want to say I want to hook up Dapper to a tweet, I want to do some sort of sentiment analysis, I just plug in Dapper. Dapper does all the communication calls for me. They make it real easy to write these cool microservice complex applications, whether, again, using GitHub or GitHub code. I'm kind of curious how many people use GitHub out there. Maybe at some point we can talk about that. I'll leave this in the slide for when I give it to Steve and Joe. These are just the highlights. There's this thing called the Book of News if you wanted to know more, a lot more. Since for my role, I only focus on app dev. I don't focus on the other 90% of Azure that's out there, but there's a lot of new things coming out. So Book of News is there. I'll leave it alone. I sprinkled in just a couple announcements on this as well. If you're using Application Insights, which is what I'm going to show you, Application Insights is the ability to collect metrics and data for app dev teams to basically see how their applications are performing, check out any exceptions or errors they might have. And what we did was added the ability to use Active Directory to tie into your Application Insight instance. So it's really a security thing, and not anybody or not any app can write to your data. I know it sounds pretty simple, but this was just added not too long ago. And the other piece that was something new is the ability to use API management and trigger an event. Event Grid is, if you think about the underlying connections that happen under Azure, everything that happens triggers an event, and this Azure Event Grid captures all these events. So we just added the ability that API management is now plugged into this eventing engine. So that is something there. And if I'm going too fast, just stop me. I wanted to get through some slides because I thought these are some gold nuggets. You may or may not find the gold nugget, but hopefully you will. Also, I get asked a lot that, hey, how do I migrate my app? How do I migrate my database? I want to run the stuff in Azure. Well, we did build some migration tools. We have an Azure App Service Migration Assistant. I know it's a mouthful on the left here. And what's cool is I can take that, run that assistant, point it to our web URL, and it will tell me what size machine or what size service it should be running in Azure, and actually could move it over there if it has access to it. So we built that assistant just to make it easier for customers to move their apps over without, like low friction, low hanging fruit, if you will. Database assistant, same concept. And I put those links in here. So these are things that I send these to customers all the time because I get asked this a lot. So again, that's what I was telling Joe and Steve earlier and Sam before this presentation. That's just, these are things that I normally talk to customers with anyway. So I wanted to at least bring it to your attention. I get asked this all week, 5 days a week, or I should say multiple times a day, all week, is I'm on Azure DevOps, I want to go to GitHub, or how do I go to GitHub? How do I adopt GitHub, etc. So this slide helps to me explain it. If you're using GitHub for repos, source code, great. If you're using Azure Boards for project management or Azure DevOps for test case management, stay in Azure DevOps. If you're not using those two things, GitHub is the future. We'll make no means about it. GitHub, Microsoft is investing heavily into Azure GitHub. Sorry, it's just called GitHub, not Azure GitHub Enterprise. So that is the direction, the strategic direction for Microsoft. If you're on GitHub, great. And just to be crystal clear, DevOps is not going away. Azure DevOps, the product, is not going away anytime soon. Well, some of our largest products are built on Azure DevOps, so it's going to be there for a while. But a couple things at Visual Studio, .NET Core. I know we're all on mute, but has anybody looked at, played around with, or using Visual Studio? We announced Visual. I don't have the chat window open, but so we announced Visual Studio 2022. I believe we're in preview 4 right now. You can actually download it. It's installed side by side. It comes built in with .NET 6, and .NET 6, of course, is the first version that will bring all the tools together, one .NET to rule them all, if you will, including what we call MAUI. And MAUI is that multi-user interface for basically building mobile apps. We used to, we had a company called Xamarin we bought, and Xamarin's now, it's not renamed, but we built MAUI from the ground up for cross mobile app development. So it makes it super easy now, which is great. Yeah, Visual Studio 22. So here's the links. You can just Google it with Bing if you'd like, but you can actually download it, install it side by side. Tonight I'll actually show you some Visual Studio 2019 things. This is something else that you may or may not know of. If you actually own a Visual Studio, like an MSDN, Microsoft and GitHub in combination now have this offer. You can actually attach we call it Visual Studio Attach, but you can actually attach GitHub license, enterprise license to that for 12 cents. It's 12 cents a license. It's 12 cents a year, just to be clear. That's not a lot of money. It's a penny a month. But if you don't know about this, now you have a full-blown license to access GitHub Enterprise. So this may or may not apply. I talked about .NET. Again, .NET Core, we almost never talk about .NET Framework anymore. I know it's still out there. There's a bunch of it out there, but .NET itself was built for your single platform to build anything from desktop to web to mobile, gaming, IoT. .NET runs everywhere. It runs in containers, runs on Linux, runs on Windows. .NET 5 is out there now. It's out there and it's supported. There's a few highlights here. The performance, of course, is quite fast. Flexible deployments, talking about containerization, and then the modern languages and different APIs, it's all open. So .NET 5, I've not built anything quite yet in .NET 5. I'm still on 3, but it's out there to play with. But you can also download .NET 6 if you want it as well. Last of the what I found interesting updates is running across customers that have legacy apps written in .NET Framework. Of course, .NET Framework lives with Windows, so it moves very slow. When Windows updates, .NET Framework updates. So what the product group did was built this .NET Upgrade Assistant. So you can take any .NET Framework and convert it to .NET 5. So now we're talking about .NET 5, Core 5. And it's pretty slick. It'll actually go through and tell you about NuGet packages you might need. It'll give you some fix. I'd say it could probably get you there 80, 90% of the way. So if you're ever converting and want to go to .NET 5 or 6, check out the .NET Upgrade Assistant. So .NET 6 is coming out. I mentioned the MAUI. We'll talk about that in just a second here, but the cross-platform web UI, that's what we're talking about here. And this is the direction. .NET 6 is the strategic direction for Microsoft as well. A couple things, multi-platform I mentioned, forms, WPF are going to be part of this as well. They always improve the performance, build time, run times, etc. There's a feature of .NET 6 called, what's it called? Hot reload it's called. So normally when you're debugging an application that's like a Windows desktop or WPF app, you have to stop it, of course, and you make a change, a tweak, and you have to let it build and compile and run again. You know, that inner loop you go through as a developer. And so now with .NET 6 and VS 2022, which is built in, it's called hot reload, and you can just make changes to the code. Your app will instantly be updated without rebuilding it. That's a big feature of .NET 6. .NET MAUI, we wish we all could be in MAUI right now, but we're not in MAUI. But MAUI is this multi-platform app UI. Again, think mobile devices, building iOS and Android apps. I'm not a mobile developer myself, but I do talk to some devs that are. And this is going to be just much easier than the old Xamarin world where you had multiple projects for multiple operating systems. So now we're back to the single project, single code base. So again, something to play with or try out. Note your calendar, .NET Conf every year with the .NET Framework group from our developer division of Redmond put on this free conference. This is called just .NETconf.net, November 9th and 11th. Fantastic content, fantastic speakers, and this is where they actually will launch .NET 6. So we can safely say .NET 6 comes out on November 9th. I hope everyone's finding some of this valuable anyway. Here's the schedule for our .NET. .NET Core 3.1, the last framework I built my demo apps on is .NET 3.1. It came out in 2019. So looking forward, where we are right now, .NET 6 is coming out like soon, November 9th. And then we'll go to .NET 7 and 8, et cetera. Notice the theme here that every other version is what we call LTS, long-term support. So those have the 3-year, I believe the 3-year long-term support. And if you get to the .NET 5, everything else just migrates forward. There was some jump from 3.1 to 5, but it's not too big a deal. So anyway, this is the .NET schedule. This is the .NET future. Okay, we're switching gears now. Something else you may or may not know is Microsoft is the product group has are the large contributors to this open source project called Playwright. And Playwright is really geared towards the end-to-end testing. So if you're used to Selenium or what we used to call coded UI tests, Selenium was pretty popular as well. But if you're doing any kind of UI testing whatsoever, give Playwright a test or give it a run. Check it out. I'm going to actually show you a demo of that. I thought it was pretty cool too. But the team that used to create Puppeteer is also a UI testing product. The team that built Puppeteer came over to Microsoft and created their own group, and they call it Playwright now. And again, they're contributing to open source. It's on GitHub. It supports all the different modern browsers as well, including mobile, which is also special for the WebDriver. So web UI testing, different languages. If you're doing C#, Python, Java, Go, it doesn't matter. I'll show you that in a second. You can also create this in your CI/CD pipelines if you're doing any kind of DevOps or whatnot. So let me show you a couple of things here. Can I move this out of the way? Yeah, good. I can move this out of the way a little bit. Here, I'm going to go like this, move my windows around a little bit. Nice. If you go to playwright.dev, you'll come to the landing page here. Great tutorials, docs, etc. If you notice on the right, you can get to your languages. So if you're a .NET developer, you go to .NET, and this is where you can get started. You'll install it, etc., and build it out. Now, of course, I'm going to jump to already having this done. So I have a project here in Visual Studio, and it's just a Playwright project, but it goes out and actually tests some web. I should probably show you what it tests, but it doesn't matter. It's testing a .NET Core application called Mercury Health. And if you look at the code here, it's using the NUnit testing framework, so I can actually tag it with test. I put it in my categories. And I don't know if you're anybody using Visual Studio Enterprise, but you get this visual test editor on the left-hand side here. But if you look at, this is just normal C# stuff, but it just makes it so much easier to, it's pretty powerful to run. I should probably show you what it's going to test. Yeah, let me show you that. I think that's fair. Why not? It's my demo, right? If I go to Mercury Health, so this is a .NET Core website running on Azure. And notice a couple things. Notice that this pop-up here shows that, hey, you have to accept. So how do you handle that in code? It's pretty straightforward here. I come down here and actually right here, look for that cookie acceptance. And with the modern day browsers, you can hit F12 and look at your developer tags and IDs and whatnot. So it was very easy to go figure out what this looks like. And this was. So if it exists, you know, click it. If you notice, there's a lot of awaits, so we're using async. I put a default timeout here, so I can wait 30 seconds is a long time. But then the rest of this just keeps on clicking, click this, click that. I'll show you a couple other places I make it. Let me go to, let's see if I want to edit something. So I'm doing button clicks. I'm testing for titles. I'm actually adding different items. I'm calling APIs, etc. So it was pretty easy to pick up and play with. So let me go ahead and run this test now. I like to test it from Visual Studio first, then I check it into my Git repos, and my pipeline will run it through, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a few minutes here. Again, this feature on the left-hand side is actually running my tests. Also notice, I didn't show that in the code here. Notice most of my tests, I purposely do this. I run them headless, so I just come out the code. It defaults to headless because it's so fast. So if you're running a lot of UI tests, this is, to me, I think this is the way to go. I like this better than Selenium, actually. One of the tests is not headless, so you'll see it. I purposely wanted it to launch the browser so you can actually watch it. Now, when you're running this through a DevOps pipeline, of course, generally speaking, you'd probably be running it on a build server, so you don't have to see, you wouldn't have to launch a browser. It wouldn't make sense to launch a browser on a build server, especially if you're using the Azure build servers. So in just a minute, it's going to get down to this this other test on the left here, and it's going to pop the browser up so you get to see that. In fact, let me find it real quick. I thought this was a cool command too. I found it was going a little too fast, so there's this command called right here. It's called Slo-Mo. So slow motion. So anyway, if this is of interest to you to do any kind of UI testing, this is a good library. So it just launched Edge. It'll go to that website, and then I think I told it to click a couple buttons, click edit, save it, back out. And then it closes it and moves on. So, all right, I think we get the point. So that's what that is. We'll close that down. Now, as long as I'm here in Visual Studio, I'm going to show you something else that you may not have seen. I thought I saw Eric say that he uses Visual Studio 2019, which is what this is. But if I come up here, there's a couple of new things we've added. In fact, we just added an update just a couple of days ago, as a matter of fact. If you go to New Project, for those that haven't seen this, it's probably old news by now. They revamped this in 2019 to give you categories. So I created a new project by language. I could create a new project by targeted by platform, or even different project types as well. So if you're doing some sort of MVC, maybe APIs, we have an API specific template, or maybe console app or core, .NET Core app, etc. So if I pick this ASP.NET Core and say next, and give it a name. You'll notice that we picked .NET 5 because .NET 6 doesn't come out until in Visual Studio 2022, so I would need that, but .NET 5 is here. And if I pick that, we can go create it, and it'll create a .NET 5 app. So once that created, the other thing that's probably significant, worthy of mentioning, is the integration with Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code and Git. Again, Git is the future. Git is the strategic direction of Microsoft, where all the engineering dollars goes as investing in GitHub. There's still money spent on Azure DevOps, but it's like a 1-to-5 ratio. I see my machine is just blazing fast tonight. Tell you what, I'll go back to the other, here we go, okay. So a couple things, new project here. The one thing I can do with this project, let me call up the code here, is I can right click on the project itself. The integration with this is, I can set up a source control system, like right from here, like add it to source control. I can, wait. I think Gary, I just saw that pop up for Copilot. Copilot's a GitHub thing, and I don't think it's out for GA yet. I know they're still working on Copilot. I may be wrong, Eric, but I'll look into that one for you. Take that as a note. One thing I can do though, they make this very easy to, hey, I want to get my source code somewhere, is we put it right in the menu, create a Git repo, right? This is new, you couldn't even do this before. So I can initialize a Git, I can create it remote if I have a GitHub account, which you do, right? Push my code up, etc. So pretty cool stuff. Make it, I'm not going to do it, but really tightly integrated to work with Git and Git repos. If I actually come here and say create one or clone one, etc., very easy to do that. You've noticed in GitHub itself, if I clone it or fork it, I can go right to Visual Studio with it. So they make that really easy. The other thing I wanted to show you, I'm trying to find out where they moved it. If I right click on the project, because I'm going to bring this up in a little bit. I'm going to show you the application insights, but if you have a project, you want to add it to it, you just right click and add it and go down and say add application insights. When I do that, it's going to ask me some questions on, hey, where's the instance in Azure? Where do you want me to store this data? And then it just basically lives together whether I run it locally or whether I run it in the cloud itself, so I have a choice. But again, this is one of those integration points. I'm showing you the tools here that, not necessarily the what, but the how, is the ability to configure these dependencies here back into Azure Application Insights. Now you do have to have a subscription in Azure. Could be your sandbox, MSDN. And then it asks you if you wanted to add a new instance or use an existing one. So I could just say, I want to use an existing one, say next, etc., or add a brand new one, and it'll go ahead and create a brand new one. So very easy to get started with whatever project you're working on, right? So keep that in mind. I'll just show you when it's already done. The only choice you have to make is what data center you want to put basically your metrics in that you're going to collect. Also, one thing I'll show you, if you haven't used this before, is the different components from an application start correlating together. All the metrics start correlating together, which allows you to see this big picture. And if you haven't figured it out, App Insights is one of my favorite services. Also note, let me actually close this. I'll go back here. I'm going to close this one too. I think we're done with this is Playwright project, so hopefully you're good on that. We're going to come back full circle back to Application Insights, but if again, developer, head down developer, you're living in Visual Studio, let's say, and you want to look at some of this data, I can come to my windows, my view windows here, and actually call up, oh, where'd they hide it? Call up, oops, sorry, wrong menu. And we have a lot of menus. This is like a big battleship. This is the aircraft carrier of developer platforms. I can say application insight search. So we pull down the metrics from your app running from the cloud back into Visual Studio. So I can say, show me things for the last 3 days. Show me any, I don't know, looking for something null with the word null in it, or whatever metrics you collect. We collect a lot of different metrics that are going on with the application. You can also collect custom telemetry. So at a glance here, I can look for any exceptions that happened, maybe API calls or whatever, and it just comes down to Visual Studio. I can look at my dependencies, my trace calls, any exceptions that happened, etc. I found this really cool. And on the left, we can collect different things. Let's say what IP it came from. I can look at what location it came from, what city it came from, etc. There is a ton of data here, so I won't bore you all with that, but just know that I can start slicing and dicing this stuff up pretty good. I wanted to show it to you here. Here's the actual exception. I wanted to show it to you here because when I show it to you in Azure, we'll see something different there. So, all right. Again, this is one of those, another interface of Visual Studio to pull this data back. So let me go ahead and go back.
Hey, Randy, this is Joe. Can that be consumed by Power BI?
Yes, it can be out of Azure, not out of Visual Studio. But there's a lot of metrics here. But yeah, I don't see why you couldn't do that. I'll make sure I point that out where you do that, Joe. Okay. I don't want to make assumptions that everyone's using Visual Studio, but we'll get back to that in just a second. So that's just a quick demo of like Playwright and some of the things in Visual Studio as well. A couple points I'll make on app modernization. Oops, wrong way. App modernization. Again, this is one of my my 4 pillars, the things I focus on. Application modernization, migration are huge for customers. And I look at it as in 4 different ways: lifting and shifting, or cloud native, built from the scratch, or born in the cloud type of thing with platform services, containerizing apps, and of course, all right, Eric, cool. Or managing databases, etc. And then of course wrapping it in DevOps. These are I'll say this one slide kind of says it all: lift and shift. That's the low-hanging fruit, is just pick it up out of a VM and throw it into a VM in the cloud. That's fine, it gets it there, but it doesn't take advantage and give you the savings and cost savings that customers want, right? So that's just to me, that's a short-term thing. When you move it from infrastructure off VMs and moving into containers or platform as a service, that's where you start saving money and using the power of the cloud. And then there's this whole concept of serverless. Could be serverless functions. Our integration services are serverless functions. IoT serverless. There's just a whole bunch of serverless stuff that's out there. But just think of these four things: rehosting, refactor, rebuilding. And then DevOps. Last but not least, every conversation I have with customers, DevOps almost always comes up. It just does. And I just have a couple slides on it. DevOps, high-performing companies. So think customers that are not using DevOps are not innovating as quickly as their competitors are. They just aren't. They're not getting, this slide says it all, right? Faster time to market, increased revenue, faster time to recovery, faster time for changes when they come in to get them out in production. I'll show you how Microsoft does it. Just a quick preview of that. And just deployment frequencies, man. When you automate, DevOps is about automation as well. When you automate, that deployment frequency is much faster, your confidence is much faster, your failure rate is much lower. So all good. This definition, you probably heard this from Donovan Brown. This is his definition of DevOps: people, process, products. Keep in mind, value is the key. Value is the key in that whole sentence. If you're not just deploying value, then what are you deploying? And how do you measure it? That's 2 things. You're deploying a feature, a bug fix, you're adding some new screen or new functionality of an app. You have to be able to measure it if anybody used it. we use application insights to measure it, whether it's used or not. So again, I'll show that during the demo on some of that, how we use it. This is that continuous delivery cycle on the right, deploying, operating, monitoring, learn, etc. It's continuous. Our feedback comes from like Twitter, it comes from Facebook, it comes from developer forums, it comes from Stack Overflow, and we take that feedback and pour it back into this planning and tracking area and part of our monitoring and learning. So we actually take real feeds from the world and figure that out and plan it for the next sprint. Some of our tooling, DevOps tooling at Microsoft, again, we're plugging into GitHub. A lot of our teams are using GitHub. Open source, I told you, was really popular at Microsoft as well. But if you're not using Azure DevOps, it's pretty inexpensive to get started, just using repos and boards, etc. If you have a Visualstudio license, it's free. If not, you can have 5 people in an Azure DevOps instance for free. So that's pretty nice. And then all the other pieces just kind of plug in together, whether it's security or key vault for keeping secrets or monitoring. And I'm going to show you some monitoring things. And I expect these slides to kind of over time quickly is to be more GitHub focused. That's my Randy prediction on that. Another one of my favorite things is our infrastructure as code. It's a DevOps practice to deploy your infrastructure ahead of time, right? Make it immutable. So hey, if it's already there, if it's already set, if the config's already done, then skip it, but deploy it. And so this is pretty popular. In Azure, we call them ARM templates, the Azure Resource Manager templates. There's Terraform, there's other means to do this, but if you deploy what's nice is that if you deploy the infrastructure ahead of time, you're storing it as code now. So now it's infrastructure as code. So that code lives in the repo with the version of your app, just like pipelines. I'll show you that. Pipelines live in the repo. Now you have that same version of the pipeline that goes with it. So everything's turning in as code. I haven't quite got the configuration as code yet, but that's also out there as well. So ARM templates are part of just, if you're going to deploy to Azure, you're deploying it through an ARM template. You can use different markup languages, etc. If you haven't heard of this is a new, I'll say new as a couple months ago. We announced it during build as well. Bicep. Bicep is the ARM template. It sits on top of an ARM template, let's say. And if anybody has ever played with an ARM template, it gets verbose very quickly. It gets confusing very quickly. It's hard to maintain, hard to manage. Yes, it's just code. You store it in the source control system. So the product group came up with this. This is a domain-specific language called Bicep. In Bicep, I can code. I'll show you the Visual Studio extension for that. It's very modular. You can use variables. You can use looping. And what's nice is once you do that, when you build it and compile a Bicep file, it turns into a JSON file, which gets deployed to Azure, and everything's great. And never have to touch a JSON file or an ARM template again. So yay for that. Oh, I already talked about that one. DevOps at Microsoft. I have a lot of customers I talk to find this interesting. Maybe or may not be. Azure DevOps is pretty big inside of Microsoft. 110,000 engineers worldwide use it. So everything we automate as much as possible. I'll show you one example of that. Our releases, 157,000 a day. That's deployment CI/CD pipelines, and that's to different products. It's not necessarily all production, but they have different type of environments and staging, etc. Look at the number of builds per month. We have 10 million builds per month using our hosted agent builds. If you're doing any kind of CI/CD, you either have an agent in the cloud or you have an agent on-prem. And then we're big on work item tracking, so project management, we call it Azure boards. Now Azure and GitHub is going to have, they call it GitHub issues. It's not quite as robust as Azure boards, but it is coming. Anyway, just a couple worthy of mentioning here. One thing I'll also tell you, so like for Azure DevOps, the product itself is built with Azure DevOps. The source code for Azure DevOps is in Azure DevOps. And it's kind of that inception concept for Azure, how Azure DevOps is built. But there's no UI testing in Azure DevOps, which is interesting, I think, just to kind of share that tidbit with you. Notice that this number on the right here, this is actually an old slide now. This is at 94,000. 94,000 unit tests get run with every single pull request. So we said there's 110,000 engineers working on it. different products. They check in their code through pull request into master branch. 94 some thousand unit tests wrong with every one of them, and every single one of them have to pass. Not one exception. Our master branches are extremely protected for whatever product we're talking about, and then the pull request is the way to protect that. So just kind of note that. If you want to know more, we're happy to talk about that. Also, is the idea here is our aim isn't always perfect. So how do you deploy? We deploy through what we call progressive exposure, and think of those rings, and think of those rings as regions. So ring 0, the very first one, the first column here is all Redmond. Redmond's 35,000 employees, all working in Azure DevOps. So they self-test, or I'll say dog food it. Remember, we used to use the term dog food. So we dog food our own product bake it for at least 24, actually in Redmond, it's about 48 hours before it moves to ring 1, which is the next ring over, which is all of North America. And then ring 2 and 3 and so forth and so on, till it moves throughout the world. Takes about 7 to 8 days to actually deploy any code changes whatsoever. Remember, we're running the DevOps services is running, and I mean, it never goes down. So they have figured out a really cool way to update the services. It's all microservice based, runs on Azure. But this is just an example of one of their CI/CD pipelines. I thought this was cool to show you. Again, any questions on that we can show you. Here's some of the products that Azure DevOps builds. So Visualstudio Code we know and love. That's out of open source and Git. It's actually built with our Azure DevOps Office products, of course. If we're using those, Minecraft, Xbox Live, DevOps itself, the Bing team uses it. The Azure networking team uses it. So not as big as the Windows 10 team though. Windows 10 is the biggest product now, soon to become Windows 11, and they use Azure DevOps as well. They also have a bunch of automated tests. I didn't want to show you this. Let me skip through this real fast here. This is just showing the size of the code. Source code for Windows 10, 500 gig. I think it's one of the largest source code bases in the world. 500 gig of source code and 6,000 repos. These are some stats. Sorry, I can't move through these faster. Sorry. These are some stats for the Windows 10 team building Windows 10 at the time when I took these screenshots. It's just an incredible when you think of the scale that the Windows 10 teams work. So I think last count was 9,500 engineers build Windows 10, and they're using all Git repos. And then they have automated tests to test across these different devices. And these are using the automated CI/CD pipelines, our build pipelines, to deploy these devices and run these automated tests. So now it would be cool to find out if they're using Playwright for any of this, which is new. So that's just my 2 cents worth. I don't think they are. Okay, let's go see a few things. Well, one thing I wanted, again, I'm showing you some different tooling here, is the idea is, this is what friends don't let friends right-click publish. You probably heard that saying before, but you can do it, but you shouldn't do it. But this is the tooling aspect that I wanted to show you here, is if you can right-click on a project and publish it out and say, hey, I want to newly publish this, I can pick my targets. So I can go to a Docker, I can go to Azure, folder or whatnot. So this dialog you're seeing is fairly new. I can pick which app service I want. I can actually run this as a container or in Linux or Windows. Generally, Linux machines are a little cheaper or less expensive. And then I can, of course, I don't have that. If I go back and I pick a Windows service, I do have some Windows services out there running already, or I could create a brand new one. And the point I'm showing you this is just the tooling that's built into Visual Studio just make it incredibly easy to deploy out to Azure. And then hosting plans, of course, this is the actual machine under the hood. Now you can pick the RAM and cores, etc. So it's not quite a la carte. These are cookie cutter stamped. And there's always a free tier. So if you ever wanted to play around with some of the services that are out there. And then there's the big boy, 32 gig of RAM, 8 core. So anyway, I just wanted to show you the tooling here. We'll get out of this.
that was one of the tooling things. I may remember something. I'll come back to it. I forget if there's something else. Let me see one more thing. Anybody doing API development? Well, I'll save that for last if I come back to it. Let's go back to Azure now. If you want to see anything specific in Azure, let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to take you through. One thing in, let's start in Azure. Let's start at the app service where I'm sitting. So that Mercury Health app, as I mentioned, lives in an app service. And I apologize if I'm making some assumptions here on this these things, but again, stop me if I'm jumping ahead. This is the Azure App Service that I talked about, the most popular service out there for application development teams. And the reason is I can come here and deploy different language apps, and the infrastructure underlying, like networking and storage, et cetera, is all configured and saved for me and maintained for me. I get some general stats on how the app's going. On the left-hand side, I'll show you a couple of favorites. Deployment slots, very popular. Deployment slots help me deploy to stage and QA, dog food, canary type environments. I can do A/B testing, not A/B testing, sorry. I can do a performance testing. So if I wanted to say, hey, I want to deploy to my dev slot, I have my developers deploying to dev slot. Don't touch the production. I can actually say route 20% of the traffic to, oops, if I can type, route 20% of the traffic to the dev slot or the staging slot or the QA slot. I'm kind of making this up as I go here, but Azure will automatically route that traffic there, and then I can monitor that using App Insights. So that's something you could look at. So slots they live on the same service plan, so you pay for it once, and then you can split it up on the slots themselves. Deployment centers also, deployment center. So here's another thing that's cool. If I started in Azure and said, hey, I want to create this brand new app service and blah, 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 I can create a DevOps pipeline from Azure. So there's always 2 or 3 ways to do the same thing. Keep that in mind. And just, again, in Azure, I can say, hey, file new app service and deploy it out to Azure DevOps, which is pretty cool. This is just keeping track of my deployments here. Other things that are part of app services configuration. So if you have connection strings, the database is probably the most popular. Different connection strings across different environments. Those are stored in the application settings. The reason I'm showing you this is because usually locally I have an app.config file that I keep my connection strings in, which is kind of bad juju nowadays, not very secure. You check it into source control, your connection strings are still there. So what you can do is put them down here. It's actually right here. So I can say, here's my database connection string, and I store it right in. It's secured because it's stored in Azure, and the trick is, because of the .NET Core app, is the connection string : and then it'll look for that. And then my app just uses it this way. So in code, I just call this out, and it has the smarts to go to the application settings to pull that connection string and connect to the database. So that's one of those tips and tricks that's there. Environment isn't anything special. Subscription keys, but the point here is, this is where I store my configurations, my again, connection strings or API calls or whatever I'm connecting to. I put it all right in here, and that's per slot, by the way. If you'll notice, if I let's say I'll go here and edit this one. Notice this deployment slot setting, because if you're using deployment slots, you would normally have a CI/CD pipeline deploy out to a dev slot, and you test it and make sure it's good. And then if it's all good, you get approved, or you have an approval process that swaps the slot. You swap code from dev, put it into production. You take what's in production, put it into dev, and it swaps it within seconds. I can tell it not to swap the setting. So deployment slots are pretty powerful when you start using it that way. Application insights, I'll come back to this one, but you configure it here, kind of tell it what kind of language you're going to collect. A couple other highlights here is the
application service plan that this runs on. Remember, an app service runs on a plan, which is just nothing more than a virtual machine under the hood, just that Microsoft maintains it here. So I can see how loaded that machine is. I can put multiple web apps on the same plan and monitor to see. I mean, this one is only 5% utilized. It's like I could put more on this one. But if I wanted to scale up, now scale up is like, hey, I picked the wrong machine. I'm paying for this large machine. I don't need it that big. Or man, I need it bigger. When I can come to this blade here and say, this, I'm working on dev test. I want a B1, we call it, and it'll tell me how much it's going to cost me on my subscription. I don't know if you knew this, when you log into Azure under your name, it will show you your prices. So this one's costing me $54 a month. It does run 24/7. You can't shut it off. Keep that in mind. Unlike a virtual machine, you can shut off and save money. These run all the time. So this is great to get started. You see even the free tier, keep in mind 60 minutes a day, everything shuts off after 60 minutes of compute time. And then there's the production. So these are more common for running real websites. So even the slowest one here is, or smallest is $73. But what I wanted to show you is you pick these, I'll say pre-canned options. You scroll down and it'll show you the features that are here. So not like, for instance, staging slots. Not all the app service plans have staging slots. Not all of them can have daily backups that are automatic or put a load balancer traffic manager in front of it. They don't all come with that. So you have kind of a la carte, pick what you like. Okay, so that's there. The other part that's very powerful here in this plan is let's say Mercury Health doesn't get a lot of traffic because it's a demo app. But if you had a real app out there, you got a lot of traffic on, the powerful piece of app service is this auto scale. And you can create a condition. I can say create a new rule that says, hey, scale this plan out if I'm going to pick, well, I have to pick a metric here. Like on average, I pick, where'd it go? Oh, right here, it was updating the metric. So you can pick a CPU is pretty popular, data IO, there's disk queuing, etc. But see, let's just say, keep it simple, CPU usage. What's really cool about this now is it's showing me that my CPU usage on average is like 12%. Or here it is, sorry, 4.4. So even before I create a rule, I get this really cool information from Azure saying, you know, you might not need to do this. But I can say, hey, if the CPU hits 70% for 10 minutes, scale it up by 1 instance. Now I'll have 2 service plans, or 3, or 4. And then as it comes back down, it will scale it back down. So this is just automatic. I just set it and forget it. Again, mine never ever scales out because it's 4%. And I even run load tests on this just to try to make it scale. But so keep that in mind. That's the powerful feature here called scale out. There's a lot of alerting you can set up as well. So that's also here. Let me see if there's something else that's cool to show you. Oh, I'm in the plan, that's why. All right, I'm going to jump over to, I've been talking about application insights. So the Mercury Health app has a database on the back end, just like any other app here. It has some API front end calls, etc. And I can monitor what this is. And I'll take a step back. Application insights, again, it's under the Azure Monitor umbrella for monitoring metrics and everything that happens in Azure, but it's really geared towards application development teams or developers to provide information in 2 different areas: debugging, performance, any failures you might have. You want to see what's going on, delays, database connections, etc., or usage. How many users are using it? Where are they logging in from? How long do they stay in my app? Which pages do they visit? Things like that. I can collect both those from this. So the investigate piece here, I'll quickly go through this. Hopefully this is of interest. Smart detection will allow me to, it uses machine learning and says, hey, I noticed your application runs this way most of the time, but today, Randy, your app, for some reason skewed some metric or was extra slow in this one area, maybe you should go check it out. And that's what this is going to report to me. It just keeps track of it for me automatically. I don't have to do a thing. So very powerful on smart detection. Live metrics I'll come back to. And transaction search. Remember in Visual Studio when I search for null, this is the same thing here. I'll grab last 24 hours. I can say same sort of thing, show me nulls or actually exceptions. I think I forget what I searched for now, maybe it was null. Yeah, same thing. So inside of Visual Studio, this is the same data, except now I'm in the portal. So pretty cool stuff. I can also, I didn't mention this before, but keep in mind, probably 80–90% of the stuff I'm showing you in App Insights comes right out of the box, no configuration necessary. That being said, I can add custom telemetry points into the app. So I can ingest them right into the app. For instance, if I'm adding, not apples, this is a nutrition thing, so. So there's a API gets called to edit and add banana items to it through the API. So again, it says custom event. So if there was some custom metric you were collecting for some reason in the app, I can put it anywhere I want and App Insights will correlate it together. So powerful as well. Also notice that not only can I grab the events that's happened, everything in Azure App Insights is all time-based. So what window of time do you want? And that's how it's billed too. It's not expensive, but it's just billed that way. So moving window of data. I like the grouping down here. So I can group the most common things that are going on. So that's transaction search. A couple more things here. Availability is important for, like, say, ping tests. Does the app, does the page, does the API have a heartbeat? And I can go ahead and you basically set this up as a ping test. Now, what's interesting is I took one of my playwright tests that actually does the UI testing and converted it into a function. Now I can call it as an endpoint URL. And I can call it every 5 minutes. And I can call it from these different data centers. Make sure that app's alive, see what the delay latency is across these different data centers, etc. So make it super easy to set this up. A couple clicks. Almost a little too powerful, right? So these are just tests. These are just whatever playwright tests, or again, I call them ping tests. Do we have a heartbeat? Failures, as you would expect. A lot of times .NET apps will swallow exceptions, but App Insights would collect them. So if I say 24, let me say my last 3 days like I did before. This showed me some exceptions here. Something that I wanted to show you that was also part of just the pure bonus you get from deploying to Azure is, notice this little arrow on the right here, upper right corner. That is what we call a marker. As you're deploying a new code out, or new versions of the app out, it puts a marker into the telemetry inside of App Insights. So I can click on that and say, when was this done? And I get my deployment. I can tell what repo it came from, when it was built, etc. So built right in there. If I actually go back, let's say 7 days, I should have some more markers in here. Call me a liar here. Let's try 30 days. My build has been failing and I just fixed it an hour ago, so that's probably why. And the idea is I can actually run these deployments and see if it improved or got worse, or hey, all of a sudden we got errors all over the place. So you can see my deployments across time now, where I get these markers here. I can also scroll down and look at the most common failures on this app. So again, as an app dev person, to go in here and say, man, I didn't know that, or man, I knew that. And then when you click it, of course, it'll tell you on the right-hand side what the actual exceptions are and so forth. And the idea with App Insights is, I'm trying to show you a good example here. The idea is to go in here and say, well, what happened here? I click on the count.
and brings up some samples. And these blades will start scrolling to the left, and I can actually drill into it. The whole idea here as a developer is look at your end-to-end transaction for that. Person came into the site, they clicked here, they clicked that, and then we pull them some data on the right-hand side. And I don't know what this one is, but so it'll show you a lot more data, and I'll scroll back. The other part, the opposite, of course, is performance. How's the app performing? Same sort of thing, same concept here. A couple of other goodies I'll show you is if you had a spike, let's say in the center, I can grab these markers at the bottom and slide them over to zoom into time. Show me specifics about that slice of time. Also, what's going on here as far as performance for, I don't know, my Bing search test, let's say. And then I can drill into samples, etc. I can also look at dependencies. So I have database connections, I have API calls. If I'm more concerned with my database connection time, I can drill into that, see what's going on with that. I can see there's response codes here, etc. Hey, same thing, end-to-end transaction for my database connections. Or whatnot. This one's going to a database server and tells me the connection string itself. So I'm zooming through this purposely. The overarching thing I wanted to mention is, which I think is the holy grail here, is this application map. In fact, you may want to start right here. I can say, show me all my calls for the last 3 days. And I can say, update my components. Now remember, I have this one, this is the middle one's my one app service instance. In 3 days, it had 149,000 calls. Those calls came from this instance, which is an API management front end, which came from some serverless Azure functions over here. And the point of showing you this is it's all wired together. As you put an app out there and things start interacting with components of the application map just builds by itself. I mean, it just builds and puts everything together and aggregates all this data together. And it makes it a nice visual to see what the heck is going on. So if you say, hey man, my 2% of the time my APIs are failing, or every call I make out to this CatFac Ninja is failing, 2% of the time, anywhere on this map, I can just click it and it'll open up a window on the right and show me exactly what's going on. So my exercise API seems to be failing. I can click right in here and go and get some information about that. Like, why the heck is this one always failing? And I can see, well, subscription keys are invalid. I'm getting return codes of 429s. That's not good. Let's go see why a 429. Same sort of thing, brings me to my end-to-end transaction. So you can have a field day inside of in the App Insights. A lot of information here. And come to find out, it's a gateway error of some sort because somebody's calling this API with a bad subscription key. Access denied. All they get is a 429, but okay. So that's the application map. I thought that was pretty cool. And I can zoom in and out. If you don't like that view of it, by the way, there's this other, more of a kind of a spoke, hub and spoke kind of view. I like the flow view personally because I can see the flow of data. So keep that in mind. Live metrics I told you I'd show you. Did it not work? So our Azure DevOps team in Redmond has a monitor up on their wall with live metrics on it, monitoring the actual instance of Azure DevOps worldwide. And this is the view that you'll see that you would see. But this shows you some incoming requests, outgoing, the overall health of the servers themselves, whatever it's running on, and real-time telemetry on what's going on. So these are, if I clicked any of these, that would drill me into like the failures or the transaction search that I showed you. That's what they would just kind of a deep dive right to it, a deep link. Also notice it's showing me also the number of servers you're running. So if I were to running a serverless app here or a bunch of app services, it would show me if it's scaled out, how much RAM is running, and what the CPU usage is on those servers as well. So this is called live metrics as part of App Insights. Now you're all wondering, hey, I got to hear Joe now. How much is this costing? You can go down to the configure usage and cost estimates here, and look, keep in mind that you can do data sampling. So, hey, collect every other metric. It's 50% of sampling or 100% sampling. Keep in mind you can control all these. You can control daily caps. Don't let me go over 100 gig a day. Don't save my data for more than 90 days. Just throw it away. Or data sampling. 100% is a lot of data. 50% is probably better. So keep in mind you can configure these things. Like all my data is costing me $37. So it comes right out of my MSDN. Of course, I have $150, but that's okay. Joe, you mentioned this before, continuous export. I want to take my data and kind of like skim it off the top and run it out to a storage account of which I can plug in, let's say Power BI, and pull it out. I do that here. It's a continuous export. So you can set your window of data smaller and have a continuous export to storage, which is dirt cheap. And then I can glean it off with Power BI or whatnot.
Right, but that would allow me to do a dashboard that I could check whenever I want without even going into Azure.
Right. As long as you did, yeah, you point your Power BI. I don't have it set up. You point your Power BI to the storage account that you set up.
Right.
Yes. And App Insights takes care of like a trickle, if you will.
Right. Right.
Yep.
Which means I could integrate that dashboard in with other KPIs.
You could. You might. Yes. If you know how to correlate it together. Yes, you could. Data's data. Yeah. I'm sorry. This is if this is too heavy App Insights, I'll go to something else here. I mentioned users as well. We talked about, hey, how many users are using this? This is not going to show you a lot of things, but this is the other half of this, is showing me who's using it, what browsers they're using it from, what operating systems they're using it from, what countries they're using it from, etc. So on a real application, this would be filled out quite colorfully. My app doesn't get used by anything, but so there's usage of the app, there's troubleshooting of the app, investigating the app. So that's what those are the three pieces. Another thing I wanted to show you was, I mentioned before we run out of time here, I know getting to the bottom of the hour, one of the things I wanted to show you was Bicep. Bicep, and I'm completely switching gears now. Bicep is this, again, domain-specific language. This is what a Bicep file looked like for creating resources. I'm creating, so the idea here is you create a main, and then the main would call all the modules as you needed more resources or services. I create a new module and let main call it. So I can create an app service, a website, SQL, a DB, configuration, an app insights, functions, etc. I define it here, and then I can call out to it, and it just brings it together. This is so much easier than creating a JSON file full of an ARM template full of JSON, right? It's tens of thousands of line here. I'll show you real quick here too. Another nice thing to know is when you're building here, let me do it this way. When you're building a Bicep file, because the Bicep is plugged directly into Azure's APIs, anything that's up to date in Azure will show up on Bicep for me. So for instance, I can hit Control Space. I'm saying, hey, I want to define a new virtual machine. I don't know the virtual machines that are out there. I can hit Control Space. It goes to Azure, does a quick API call, and brings back all the different machine sizes that are available right now to me. And then I can hit Control Space and figure out what other, or actually I got to close the curly, and then figure out what other properties it requires to build a VM. Bicep will give those to me. So Intellisense is part of Bicep. This is a very, very small example, but other things I can do too is I can just type resource. And for instance, these are like the default template for whatever storage account whatever provider I needed. That was a bad example. Let me try this again. Let me go like this. What's nice too is, let's say, all right, I'm gonna do this again, resource. I'm gonna call XYZ storage, whatever it is, storage account, let's say. And as I type, there's an error here, that's what's going on. As I type, again, it's hitting the Azure API to show me all the different resources I can create.
from application insights, to virtual machines, the data to databases or data lakes, API management. This list just goes on and on and on. So you really, depending on what you're looking for. And then what's nice too is if I were to say storage, or was it app service? Yeah, I'll say app platform. Spring Cloud, here's Spring Cloud apps. Notice it also brings back the versions of the actual APIs themselves. So it takes all the guesswork out. None of this exists really in JSON files building ARM templates. So this is Bicep in a very small nutshell. Now, once the Bicep's done, notice on my left, you check those in the source control. I do not need to have a JSON file to deploy to Azure. I can come down to the command line here, and in Bicep, it's just Bicep space build. You'll watch on the left, it'll create the JSON file for me out of my files. If there's a warning, I'll get warnings. If there's an error, I'll get my errors. This is saying basically, hey, you're using something that doesn't, define something that didn't exist. You get that Intellisense, which is really nice. And now, again, you wouldn't check in the source control. You won't have to. Bicep's intelligent enough to know through a CI/CD pipeline. Just deploy the Bicep file, and it will it'll build it and deploy it on the fly under the hood. You don't even have to see it. So that's Bicep in a nutshell. The other nutshell I wanted to show you is talking about Playwright again. We're going back to UI testing. Apologize if I'm bouncing around, but all this stuff is all good. I showed you, I don't think I still have it open, do I? I showed you the Playwright code in Visual Studio, but you might ask, well, that's a lot of hand typing, right? Well, I'll show you a shortcut. If you install the Playwright tooling, and that's just part of that website, there's a tool called Codegen. First of all, let me get the URL for, where is it? This one. Nope. This one. This will make it easier. If I say Playwright space Codegen, Codegen is really slick and gives me the ability to record something, like record a UI session and not have to code anything. Who wouldn't like that? Maybe I'm lazy, but I don't want to have to hand code this. I'll pretty it up and add some extra things. So let me show you. So Codegen pops open the editor on the right. And on the left, pops open a blank wherever. I can go to Google, I go to Bing, I go to any website I want. But as I go to the website, on the right-hand side, it starts writing the code for me. So if I click a button here, and I click another button here, notice this, it's adding the code for me here, and I say, okay, that's cool. Let's go back to the list and whatever. Go back home. It's writing the code for me. Not only that, if you'll notice at the top here, I can actually tell it, I don't want C#. I'm a Python developer. It'll convert all that code to Python for me on the fly, or Java, or script. And then of course, now here's where it falls a little bit. I have to actually copy that to the clipboard and then go into my editor and paste it into Visual Studio Code, which is fine. But this gets me, 90% there. So I thought that was really slick. Copy it, close this, we're good. Go here, file new. Paste it in. I forgot to tell it was C#, but that's okay. And away you go. So very, very quickly get started with Playwright. That's another good one there. The last thing I'm going to show you is, I'll go back to my other one. In Visual Studio Code, so forget Bicep, let me go ahead and, I'll keep it open. On the extensions area here is, first of all, there's a Bicep extension. A Bicep extension, so you install this to get the visuals, to get the IntelliSense, etc. So you do definitely want to install this. Lots of extensions if you haven't played with VS Code. Get out of there. But the other piece I wanted to show you was the integration with some of the services that I've been showing you, like Azure Functions is here. There's a new, this is a preview. It's in private preview right now called Azure Load Test tool, the ability to deploy a test out to Azure and have it figure out the load in the virtual machine under the hood, wire it up as a test rig, and run your tests and then provide results back. So this is a pretty cool service. I'm excited about it. It's not quite ready for prime time yet, but it's coming. API management, another popular service. App Service is really popular. API management is probably the second most popular service out there. Now I'm showing you these things because from Visual Studio Code, I can go over here to my Azure Blade. What? This was signed in prior, so sorry. I don't know what's going on here. Only during a demo. It's like it forgets. Let me close this window so it's not so confusing. One of the things I wanted to show you was just the ability to, these extensions, when you just log into Visual Studio Code and log into Azure, if you're working with Azure, again, I'm in the resources here, I can look at different services. So my app service for Mercury Health, for instance, I can go in here and look at it. I can see, remember the 2 deployment slots I have, there's the deployment slots. I can poke around and start looking at the resources running in Azure from Visual Studio Code. So how very nice is that? That's pretty cool. API management. I have some APIs that Mercury Health gets called out to. So we call a bunch of different operations in Mercury Health right here. So all my puts and gets and deletes, etc., which is fine if I want to edit these or edit policies that go with these or some kind of, now these are JSON, so I wouldn't want to edit this direct, but what I can do, which I thought was really slick, is I can right click on the API itself and extract it. So it extracts part of the extension. I can extract it, which basically creates a zip file for my APIs and the policies that go with it. The point of that is you check it into source control. And then at build time, I can build this API back together and allow my dev teams to make changes to the APIs themselves, just like they do normal code, which is quite nice. And then check that in. That's like another question that comes up quite a bit is how do you do CI/CD DevOps with API management, right? So this is how you do that. So that's there. So I get at my API calls, which is nice. Let me go up here. Function calls. So we do have some functions running here. I have Mercury Health functions that are running all the time. And for that inner loop, it's really nice. I can work on these different functions. Let's see what this one does. These are trigger functions. I can actually work on the function in Visual Studio Code and deploy it. So if you haven't played with Visual Studio Code before, let me go to some questions now because I know we're at the bottom of the hour, and let me stop. I'll stop this. I'll stop if I can figure out how to turn this off here. Hey Steve, where's the window for questions?
Let's see.
Yeah, I can't quite see it here. What the heck? Oh.
All right, well, I know I saw 2 come across, so I'll read them to you here.
Okay.
Does Azure DevOps support pulling code from GitHub or GitLab for CI/CD?
Yes, on Git. I didn't show you too much of that. Let me show you real quick a pipeline. If I were, where's my pipeline? If I go to here and go to pipelines, say build a brand new pipeline, most of the pipelines in Azure DevOps or GitHub, they both support pipelines themselves. But if I say new pipeline, they're looking for a source control system as part of a service. So if I say, I'll say classic for the fun of it. And these are the ones that are supported on the box. So GitLab, I haven't seen that one, but Git or Azure DevOps for sure. That was the question, correct? GitLab?
Yes.
Yeah. I haven't seen that one. And even Bitbucket it has to be the cloud service, not the on-premise version.
Okay.
Other questions?
And there was one more in the chat. Can an API deployed under Azure VM be viewed as well?
Can say that one more time. Can an API deployed
under Azure VM be viewed? I think when you were looking in VS Code there at all the resources. So if you have something deployed to the VM, could you see it in that list?
Yes, you could. I don't have any VMs, but yes, they would show up here in a list. Yeah, correct. Yeah, this will pick up whatever resources I have deployed. I don't have I don't deal with virtual machines a whole lot. I'm not on the infrastructure team. They would, if I was an infrastructure person, I would do that a lot more. But yeah, they would show up here. Short answer.
Okay, we just got another one.
Okay.
I'm actively looking into JMeter for load testing. How soon is Azure load testing coming? I'm wondering if I should wait.
I would suggest not waiting because the load test service uses a JMeter file for its load test, which is, let me see if I can show that to you. Yeah, so, oops. Super quick here, but I have a Mercury Health JMeter load test. The load testing service, you hand it off a JMeter test. So if I were to say Azure, oops, what the heck? Sorry, I'm in the wrong file here. Clearly, I'm not doing this right anymore. Anyway, this isn't working. The idea is that the Azure load testing service will go ahead and create, like you still need to create a JMeter test, you just run it in the service. So we could save that for another time, but once you create that file, what it will look like in Azure, let me go back to Azure real quick here. Get back there. If I go into, I can just give you a quick preview of what it's gonna look like. If I can find it, here we go. From Visual Studio Code, I say, hey, I have this JMeter file, sling it over to Azure, it will run it. And will look something like this. You'll pick a machine size. You'll pick how long it runs because you build your JMeter file first. Run it for 2 minutes, run it for whatever 10, and then you can upload it and it'll keep track of. This is kind of the output screen. So number of requests and errors, etc., the memory usage and so forth. Okay, so the output's there. If I were to say, let me go back real quick. If I were to say I configured my test. Some of this is, again, this is also new. It's still in the works. The test plan, the load. Yeah, how many instances of, and I don't know what size these are under the hood, small, medium, or large. These are VMs. If I wanted to run this across, obviously use the VMs to generate load, say small, Azure will go out and build this whole thing up for me and then start running the test. So pretty slick. If I were to say, oh, I could rerun it. I wanted to run a new one. Oh, you have to have a test that you upload first. Create new test. Give it a name. So this is all, I've not seen this yet, so they change this all the time. This was not a wizard before. The file you need is again, it's probably a JMeter file, so they made this a lot easier. Before, the only way to do this was from, I don't have a JMeter file here, but you upload the file, and looks like it's going to run. Yeah, JMeter. See how it says JMeter script? So it's looking for that. So do continue with that. Again, I'm going to play with this some more now that they changed this. The only way to make this work was from Visual Studio Code now, so they changed it, which is cool. Yeah, monitor the resource and then review and create. Okay, so good. This is very much in line with all the other blades that are in Azure now, which is nice. So I'll have to come back to this. But yeah, CSS JMeter script. So you're good. The other thing I promised to show you, and I know we're over time, I do need to get running here. I wanted to show you what like a finished pipeline looked like. So again, YAML pipeline, checked into source control, pipeline as code, that's the future, YAML is the future, definitely do it that way. GitHub is the same way, only called actions, but it's still YAML. Is you'll want to go into, you can set it up, this is just an example, set up the pipeline to actually do the build, any security testing, scanning, credit or certificates, etc. Do it all in one fell swoop pipeline. You can set it up this way where you can do your builds. I deploy infrastructure. I use bicep files to make sure the infrastructure stood up. I deploy the database itself, web app, function app, etc. My API is not working. I need to fix this, but that's the idea: is deploy the API service and then run Selenium tests. I run the playwright tests, the very ones I showed you. They're ran here automatically as part of my pipeline. Now I have one failing, which I purposely told it to continue if it failed. I'm good with it. And then the idea is have a area that is for approval. So these are gates, right? I don't want to go forward. I deploy to my QA staging slot. I don't want to go forward until some checks passed. One of those checks is make sure the app's running, make sure it has a heartbeat, maybe make sure that the response time is less than 10 seconds or whatever I told it here. And then the approval is me, somebody manually come in, and I would get a notification to do this right. Love it, looks great. Didn't even look at it, but I know it's there. And say approve. So that triggers the pipeline to continue and deploy out to production, basically, or the next stage or the next slot, whatever's out there. So this is YAML, this is the output of YAML. Again, I can go look at the tests. I can see some tests that ran. I can see what environments it's going out to. So this is again, we can save this for another time. Happy to come back and show more DevOps or App Insights or whatever. But this is what's going on here. All right, I know we're past time now, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Any other questions? Sorry, any other questions, Steve, before I stop?
That's it from the chat. Anyone else have any questions for Randy? That doesn't look like it. Well, thank you very much, Randy. Very much appreciate that presentation.
I appreciate everybody's time tonight. Thank you very much. Thank you, Joe, Steve, for recording and inviting me to this. Hopefully you picked up a gold nugget here and there, or maybe some was a repeat. But I appreciate you getting me on this.